pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for Tuesday, August 21st, 2018. Welcome to the show. To all the brand new listeners, thank you for your listening, and you can subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/sports podcasting network, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Make sure you look for Soccer Today or the Sports Podcasting Network. Hit the subscribe button and the shows will be downloaded before you even know it. First of all, good morning, Duane.
Good morning. Late day, rainy day here in Toronto. I told you it was coming. I guess it's a Seattle fall we're getting. It was really hot actually. After I said that yesterday. Now all the humidity is falling from the sky and punishing me for my saying fall was coming, I guess. I don't know. Anyway,
I'm still good for it's going to be raining in Montreal later today, but I'm still good to have maybe a 50-kilometer bike ride, and that's my plan for the day. So that's going to be fun. No, I'm not climbing the mountain this week. I'm still recovering from last week. Anyways, it's not a cycling show, which I do have, but it's in French. But if you want to listening to my cycling show, it's coming back next week. But Duane, before we get started, by a little Europe overview of the weekend, there's a few interesting results in both the Premier League, League One, and as well in Serie A, the debut of Ronaldo, and we've seen the ratings go through the roof. Their best rating for a non-championship game in forever. But first of all, Jonathan David, the Canadian wonder kid in the Jupiter League in Belgium, has extended his contract until 2022. This was announced yesterday, and he scored 5 goals out of 5 games, barely playing in those games, but still finds a way to be influential. In the weekend, he played against Eden, and he didn't score against Uden, but still was able to be instrumental. It's quite the progress for this Canadian wonder kid. So Duane is somewhere in the ether, coming back probably in the next few seconds. But Jonathan David, it is quite a story. An unexpected debut of his professional career. And I do feel that it's going to just get better from here. Imagine if he has more playing time, he would be better off with more goals. And that's very, very fascinating to me, is if Jonathan David can represent Canada for a long time coming. And Jonathan David, a player that we're not necessarily expecting to be at that level this quickly, but Duane, Jonathan David, what a story.
It is, and it's a surprising story because he's a kid that was really under everyone's radar prior to this. I mean, normally, with Alphonso Davies, for instance, we knew of Alphonso Davies when he was 13. We even knew of guys like Marc-Anthony Kaye to a certain extent. I mean, I know he came out of left field for a lot of people, but those of us in the know kind of knew about him. But this kid, even just last year we started to hear rumblings, but this is kind of a complete comet that we're seeing right here, and it's kind of refreshing to see this. And he's gone to Ghent, and it's a good starting place. That's actually where Carl Larum might have started when he was younger. Had he chose to not go MLS route, so there's some connections over there. Clearly they're using and tearing it up in the Europa League as well as the league. Now, people are going to look down their nose a little bit and say it's only the Belgium league, and they're not, the top clubs in the Belgium league, although they're a consistent club in the Belgium league. Obviously, they're in the Europa League, so they're upper table.
And they qualified for the Europa League group stage because of Jonathan David, and that's not too shabby, because of his late goal in the first leg against Jagiellonia, that they were able to qualify, and that's on him. It's Jonathan David for his position on the pitch, too, to be that influential. 5 goals in 5 games, and he didn't score in his 5th game. So it's pretty much 5 goals in 4 games, and that is impressive.
Yeah, and he's a kid. He's a teenager still. So I mean, how are you going to complain about something like that? And the thing is, too, I mean, for those that are new, this is our position in the Europa League. It is very difficult for us to cover it during the group stage because there are 8,000 games going on, and we have MLS season, peak season going on at the same time. However,
Champions League, Premier League, and everything else, too.
Yeah, but it's a competition that we both, I think, enjoy, and we enjoy it because there are good teams in there, and there are worthwhile. It's entertaining soccer sometimes. It's entertaining football sometimes. Don't care what word you use. It's fun, and there's worthwhile teams in it. And if Benfica's playing today in the Champions League qualifier, they could go down. That's a huge, massive, historic club that could be in the Europa League, and often is in the Europa League in the second half of the season. Atletico Madrid won it last year. There's lots. They came down in the Champions League, but there are lots of worthwhile teams in there. So don't look down and dismiss this accomplishment of this kid. Is it as impressive as Alphonso Davies? No, but Alphonso Davies is a generational player.
Alphonso Davies is not just in Canadian standards, Duane, but in world standards, he's an outlier. He's one of those rare generational talent that, never mind just being Canadian, if he was from any other country, he would still be considered a top prospect, and that's why Bayern Munich were willing to offer 13 to 20 million to buy him.
Yeah, I was looking at, I know not everyone's an advanced stats guy out there, but I was looking at the advanced numbers yesterday in MLS. I was actually trying to look up Alex Bono's numbers. That's how I got into it. But I noticed on the first page of the Who Scored ranking, Alphonso Davies is ranked 6th in all of Major League Soccer right now. He's ahead of Javinko. Like, he's phenomenal, and he's 17 years old. So, that's a different level we're talking about here. But this is a remarkable accomplishment since, like I said, it's out of left field. And the fact that I even listed a couple players off the top of my head that are young and are still have lots of chances to continue their development, I think that's really exciting for Canadian soccer. Now, we need to find a defender. I did an exercise last week on my Twitter feed. You can go back and look at it. There's nothing there.
Defenders? Maybe a few more than one. We need a back line. But yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's James Henry. So the two guys with first names as last names.
Oh, and we all know what we remember of Daniel Henry lately. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of Daniel Henry, and I think people tend to get hung up on his mistakes more than they look at his overall play, but his mistakes are obviously troublesome. So I'll leave it at that. But yeah, but there's exciting attacking talent out there. You're trying to work out the lineups, and you're like, did you know who'll that even start? I mean, that's where they're at right now. And
depends if Baloo. This all depends on Baloo, right? Does Junior Hullet play? That depends on Baloo's choice. And we're gonna know sooner rather than later. If he's called up for those Nations League, he accepts it or declines it, and that will give us a bit of a window into his mindset going forward internationally.
Yeah, 2 weeks to the first Nation Leagues. I don't think you're going to have them, try and convince him to go to the U.S. Virgin Islands or Florida, I guess. They're playing that game in Florida, but probably that home game in Toronto. I suspect that there'll be some...
Especially that he's close to actually making the roster with Barcelona. All reports indicating he will be a Barcelona player, never mind Barcelona B, so that's positive. The other news aspect I wanted to just barely touch on before we go into a little bit of a Europe overview is the Nashville situation. 7-4 was the city council vote to decline and reject the MLS stadium offer, which includes the destruction of the old Expo building and the rebuilding of this, and include a $1.75 tax, a municipal tax increase, a minimum at least, to help pay the debt of that potential stadium. And 7 out of 4 councilmen has decided to vote against it. And this really puts a stick into the wheel of Nashville, even though they already have been announced as an MLS franchise.
Yeah. It gets a little confusing. It has to do with the redevelopment around the stadium, this vote. But yeah, it is certainly a setback, and there's a major vote upcoming very soon that could in fact derail the whole stadium issue. And I don't know what MLS does at that point, because they've already awarded them the franchise. So do you roll back? Do you say
okay, Miami, come on in. You got a new logo. You got a colors scheme now. And
Miami's
Nashville
already coming in.
I know, but maybe before Nashville, and Nashville might be delayed a bit.
Yeah, you might do the year on that. I mean, I guess you have the Nordique option, we'll call it, in their back pocket, which is Sacramento. And yes, I'm calling you the Nordiques of MLS, because I don't think you're ever getting in. Just like there will never be a Quebec Nordiques again.
No, there'll never be a hockey team in Quebec City, and that's just fine by me. I don't like Quebec City. I'm sorry.
Maybe an AHL team. They could maybe they could put the Laval team in there. I don't know. That'd be your
leave it in
backyard.
Laval. I love Laval. Laval's my hometown. Used to be my hometown, so that's fine. All right, Duane. Let's look at the Premier League results for a second here. Cardiff Newcastle 0-0. That's yeah, exactly.
Well, it ended fun. I mean, and the penalty miss at the end was kind of made up the whole game. But at any rate, yeah, it's great to start your weekend. Go on.
Tottenham continuing to score a lot of goals. 6 goals so far in 2 games. Another 3-1 victory. West Ham bottom of the league as well. Bournemouth 2 on the road to West Ham. Interesting result for Leicester. Leicester beat Wolves. We were expecting maybe a better beginning of season for Wolves, but they have been having tough games. Everton 2, Southampton 1. London is blue. Chelsea 3, Arsenal 2.
It's quite the game, that one, too. It was exciting all around. I mean, I don't know how well played it was, but it was exciting to watch for sure. The first half was a little wild, and it seemed like Arsenal almost decided to sit back and take that draw in the second half, and then they were overwhelmed. They might as well have stayed on the front foot like they did after they fell behind 2 goals. But alas, I think that the interesting there's a couple interesting results this game. Well, obviously Brighton. You'll get there. So yeah, we'll get there in a moment. You know, I'll enjoy that conversation. But also, I thought the Bournemouth win was interesting. Yeah. Watford is 2-0 right now. The big win on the road there. Watford doesn't win on the road. They went into Burnley, into Turf Moor, and scored 3 goals. That's not easy to do. Team, Turf Moor, actually big game for Burnley this Thursday. Maybe they were distracted by that, but yeah, a lot of fun results this week, and I'll just keep letting you going. But yeah, it was an interesting week in the Premier League for sure.
Speaking of fun results, Man City, Huddersfield. Didn't I tell you that Aguero would play himself into the starting 11 all season long, and Jesus would just be waiting on the bench for his opportunity? Aguero, 3 goals. Man City, 6. Huddersfield, 1.
Aguero hat trick. He has now tied for second all time in the Premier League history for hat tricks with Robbie Fowler. He is behind Alan Shearer. Speaking of Newcastle, we started this at the start as the all-time leader in that department, and if the way City's scoring this year, maybe he might rein him in by the end of the year. No, 6-1, and it was. I'll tell you, I had to pick up my girlfriend at the airport, so I didn't watch about 20 minutes of the second half of that, but I wasn't too worried about it when I left. It was kind of a good result there all around. All right, it just dominant. I mean, Huddersfield, they were playing poorly either. It was just City just had too many ideas. Mendy coming down the wing. What did I say at the start of the year? The story of the year would be, and now that they got the win over Arsenal, which was a little easier than we thought, got all these recently promoted teams in their next string. They could be staring at 8-0, and then people are maybe people other than my insane self will be whispering the possibility of chasing down Arsenal. Not this year's Arsenal.
No,
early 2000,
2004, and 2005 Arsenal. Well, we'll see. All right, you mentioned Burnley and Watford, and for Watford to go on the road to beat Sean Dyche's team 3-1 in Burnley is an exciting result. The other exciting result, and they were full measure for it, the Seagulls. Brighton and Hove Albion 3, Manchester United 2. The famous third-year slump for a team managed by Jose Mourinho. Duane, I've seen this movie before, and it doesn't end well for Jose Mourinho.
There's a couple interesting points of this, obviously, and I'll stay nice here and objective for a moment. I thought United looked okay in week 1. Now the competition wasn't maybe as strong as you would have thought, and they were playing Leicester, and Leicester hasn't started particularly well. They didn't look particularly inspired in that game, so I thought United shut them down pretty well. But in this game, it was just it was a combination of things. I mean, they didn't really look like it was 3-2, but it was really 3-1. The second goal was late. Really not really in it at all. There wasn't a lot of pushback in that second half. The desperation you wanted to see wasn't really there. When I talked about the Whitecaps in the Voyageurs Cup last week, I think that there's a similar sort of discussion to be had about this game here, and there's a question to be had. And here's a couple points out of this. First off, we're falling into the same trap everyone else does. We're talking about United's loss rather than Brighton's win. And I think we should take one moment and say Brighton, this is, for a team that was nearly out of the entire football league in the 90s, when United was at the top of the footballing world. I think you should, stand back and give them applause. They've now beaten United twice in a calendar year, and that's something that I don't think anyone would have dreamed of back then. Yeah. So good for them.
And they were full measure too, right? And Brighton was full measure. The goals they scored were replicable goals, and that's that's an expression that I use quite often, because if you're looking at a season whole, especially in a one table, no playoff format, where one-off games, victories are important, but it's more how can you replicate the same type of goals, same type of expected goals. The goals of Brighton were full measure, especially the second goal, that little heel flick goal was beautiful, and Brighton was full measure at home in their beautiful stadium in South England, and were able to beat United. And United, the Pogba situation with Mourinho and other players, as much as Mourinho says, oh no, everything's going fine, guess what? The perception, the optics, and looking at them play, nothing is fine.
Yeah, it's now that we've given Brighton their due. I mean, the talking point is United in this, because they are an historic team, and they are struggling certainly right now. And it's hard to say struggling after one win, one loss, but certainly the way you see them lose that game, you can't imagine them competing too heavily in this league to certainly not really be in a title race. And that would be several years in a row now that United's not really in a title race, and I don't know when the last time it's been this long of a stretch. Mourinho, he's always going to be a talking point. He's always going to be a bullet point for you to discuss, for sure. And there was an interesting conversation. I believe it was either on Football Ramble or on The Guardian. I forget which, but on one of the regular English podcasts following this weekend, talking about where if they were to fire him, who's going to hire him right now? And it's not an easy answer.
I know who. Someone in MLS. He'll take over Siggy Schmidt in LA next year. Who knows?
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be something. In the past, that's kind of an absurd discussion to even entertain. But now, I mean, maybe he's looking at stuff like that, because I don't think his stock is anywhere near what it was a few years ago. He was in the same conversation as Pep, a couple years ago. Now, no one's talking about them in the same breath, right? Like, there's a rivalry in Manchester, I guess. You get that talk there, but I don't think anyone thinks Mourinho is anywhere near the quality right now. And certainly the performances of his teams are not really illustrating it. We talk about the Portugal job. That's not really up for grabs anymore. There was talk of the Inter job, maybe. Inter's kind of struggling a little bit, and he's still beloved there because he gave him the Champions League title. So maybe he goes back to Italy, but it's not a snap your fingers, he gets an automatic job now. And in fact, they went on to suggest that Wolves might be an option for him. So the fact that you're even considering a club of that stature with his name at this point in his career is kind of like he's like gone up the mountain and he's coming back down now, right?
Yeah, the third-year jitters in Chelsea left a mark. And whatever happens from now until Christmas, what's the over-under? Christmas, maybe he will be gone. We'll see. But the jitters of the third year leaves a mark in people's imagination. And the fact that Mourinho... Go ahead.
I was going to say, what just struck me, what he reminds me of, and it's another athlete that's in the news a lot right now, and it's the Tiger Woods journey, where he was seemingly unbeatable. And then he had the infamous incident with the golf clubs, not on the, being chased by cars by his estranged now ex-wife. And with Mourinho, you consider the Dr. Eve, back in the last season. That seemed to be the moment that he jumped the shark, so to speak. And I don't think his reputation has ever recovered from that.
No, and I have to agree with you. The fact that that whole thing happened, and it does leave a mark. And now people are not necessarily trusting his tactics too. I was going to say the game passed him by a bit. You can't always just rely on what you used to be doing. You have to evolve as a manager. And when you look at Jose Mourinho's teams over the last 3 years, the last time they were really successful, of course, it was Chelsea winning the Premier League in 2016. Yes, 2016. And when Chelsea won the Premier League, they won in a defensive way, but they had players like Hazard that would change a game. Even though you play really defensively, you have him up top or as an attacking midfielder, and guess what? It really transitioned from defensive to offensive real quick. Now, with Man United, if you don't use your Pogba and don't use your other great players in that role, and not even finding a way to get Alexis Sanchez correctly involved in the play, the game passed him by. And I think this is a bit of why he's been struggling this year. Last year, it was successful in a way where United was battling for the title up until a few months before the end. So maybe not a contender, but they were close to it. This year, I think it's going to hit the fan, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned his tactics. He kind of started the evolution away from possession-based football into counter-based football, but he only took it so far, and other teams have perfected it. I mean, now you see even the best clubs in the world putting part of that high press, quick attack kind of philosophy in the play with different varieties, whereas he seems like he really truly is parking the bus, even against teams that they should be holding more on. And there was an interesting point made up is that when they play teams like Brighton no longer fears. It used to be when you play United, there was just this belief that they got points, during the handshakes a lot of times just because of that crest, right? And that aura and Alex Ferguson on the sidelines, and teams just went in knowing they were going to lose, whereas that isn't there anymore. And again, this goes back to continue the Tiger Woods analogy, right? Tiger Woods was the same way. It used to be that if he was a stroke behind, people would be like, oh, here comes Tiger. They don't do that anymore, right? Because the mystique is gone. And I think there's a bit of that happening right now. They just don't have that, and you just don't have that fear with them. And so teams like Brighton are willing to go out and get on the front foot and have belief that they can get a result in these games, whereas they didn't in the past. And, perpetuates too in the fact that United no longer feels indestructible. They get a little bit of adversity and they don't push back from it. And I think we saw that. I mean, when it comes down to Mourinho's job security, to me, it comes down, and I mean, I'm not saying anything that's, crazy, like revolutionary here, but it's going to come down to the Champions League play. He'll last till Christmas unless they completely go in the tank on a relegation fight or something, but that's not likely.
Or unless they don't even make it to out of the group stage of the Champions League too.
That to me would it be. That's what's going to get him fired if they don't qualify for the knockout round. And we'll see what the draw is. United has notoriously gotten good draws over the years. I don't know what that's about, and I'm not suggesting anything, but they have if you look at them.
Happenstance,
yeah. So it's we'll see what their draw is and we'll see what they do. But it's the Mourinho mystique is gone. He's no longer the special one. He's just a one.
He's just a coach. Now let's look quickly at Serie A. Chievo Juventus, the first game of the 2018-2019 season in Serie A. Juventus, and this game has been the most watched Serie A game since 2016, a group stage game of the Champions League, like in Italy proper. And in 2013, there was one other game that was really popular. I think it was a Derby di Madonna, so the Milan Derby. Outside of those two games, Chievo and Juventus was the most watched Serie A game in a long time. I wonder why. And no, Ronaldo did not score, but Juventus got the win late in this game against Chievo on the road. 2 for Chievo, 3 for Juventus. We truly see the Ronaldo impact, and it has nothing to do with just the result of the game. It has to do with how we're actually talking about Serie A, which wasn't the case before.
Yeah, and you might think about Serie A, but you're right. It's out of sight, out of mind a lot of times because the fight at the top hasn't really been there. So you add this sort of star power to make it a little more interesting. You still wonder whether the fight's going to be there at the top, but not exactly a dominating win. But then again, I don't know if we're going to talk about legal or not, but I watched the PSG game as well, and they didn't exactly dominate in that either, and they ended up getting the job done. And I think early on in the season for clubs like that, that's really just about finding form, getting their fitness fully up to speed so that they can focus on what matters to them, which is going to be that Champions League run. But, the Ronaldo goal watch will continue for another week, and those ratings will continue to stay high.
And I have a feeling next Saturday against Lazio, he might be opening his account. And speaking of Lazio, they lost to Napoli. 2 for Napoli, 1 in Lazio, and this game happened in Rome. Torino 0, Roma 1 on the road. This one happened in Turin. Parma 2, Udinese 2, Empoli 2, Cagliari 0, Sassuolo 1, Inter Milan 0. So for Inter, this game on the road is a tough way to start the season. Sassuolo is not necessarily a top team in the Serie A. Will be battling probably for 13, 14, and be in that conversation. Inter Milan, this has been dubbed the rebirth of Inter Milan. They're supposed to be another type of contender this year with their new signings and the fact that they're in the Champions League this year and those aspects to it. Sassuolo put a big damper in the beginning of the season for Internazionale with this 1-0 win at home.
Yeah, and I've been belaboring this for a while. If you believe in competitiveness and you want to see a competitive Serie A, even if you hate Milan, even if you hate the Milan clubs, you've got to hope that they can get it going again at some level, both sides of that divide. AC Milan has obviously made another ownership change. They had their transfer ban rolled back, or the European ban rolled back, because they now believe that they're not run by, criminal enterprises, basically, or people that have no clue what they're doing. So, depends on which. I mean, they've had both in the last little while. So at any rate, allegedly. So yeah, it's a lot going on in Syria, but I gotta hope that they can turn that around in a certain amount, but not a great start. I mean, say last year, at the start of this year, AC Milan was, because the money was coming in, and it turned out to be kind of false money, and they got in some trouble there, and we had to flip it again. But there was a lot of hope for them at the start of last year, and it fizzled out pretty quickly. So we'll see. It's basically we're in the show me, don't tell me phase when it comes to the Milan clubs, because there's been a lot of false promises for new starts the past little while, mostly on the red side, but the blue side yesterday showed, or this weekend I should say, showed a little bit of a vulnerability perhaps as well.
And Joey Saputo's club, the owner of the Montreal Impact, is also the sole owner of Bologna FC. The 1909 team, Bologna lost at home with a red card to SPAL, which is a team that's going to battle for relegation, and I guess Bologna is going to battle for relegation as well again this year. As well as,
it seems to me that Syria doesn't have a mid-tier, and that's kind of
it's true, right? Either you're top team or you're battling for relegation.
I don't know, Udinese maybe. I really, it's hard to understand exactly. I guess maybe the Milan clubs might be the middle of the tier, but yeah, it's kind of a problem in a lot of those leagues now. We don't have really a middle ground. We either have teams that are easily relegated and you haven't heard before, or teams that are the top. So hey, it is what it is.
It is what it is. And news coming out of Ligue 1 as well, Ligue 1. For a third straight season, Super Mario has chosen Nice as his team. It has been announced yesterday. So OGC Nice will have Mario Balotelli with them for the rest of the season. And you mentioned PSG. They were trailing against Guingamp in the game. They overturned that game situation and won 3-1 at the end of the day because, well, Mbappe and Neymar and great players. Cavani's injured, but yes. So PSG 3, Guingamp 1. That's pretty much the only interesting result so far in Ligue 1 after 1 week. So that's interesting. But there's another great result. Toulouse beating Bordeaux 2-1, and Bordeaux is maybe back to its former glory in a way. There's the conversation with Poyet, the coach. Is he still the coach? That's the question. And if you haven't seen this press conference in French of Poyet, former coach of Bordeaux, where he basically does the most impressive 4 minutes of a coach press conference, literally throwing his owner, throwing the front office under the bus, saying, yeah, I didn't have my favorite player, and they told me he would be available, and then he's not, then I turn around and he's in Montpellier. What happened there? The club needs to be accountable, and if they're not, I'm just going to pack my bags and leave. And that's an interesting aspect to it, too. I don't know if you caught that press conference in French. Probably not, Duane, but yeah, it's fun to see a manager being honest, being upfront, and having the cojones, if not to having the testicular fortitude to say it like it is. And that's very impressive for me going forward. So those are the interesting results in Europe so far. As always, you can follow us on social media at 24th Minute for Duane, at Kev Laramee for myself, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Soccer Today. And until then, as always, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee. We wish you a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.